Welcome to the NJ Criminal Podcast and part 4 in this series.
And tell me about what your thesis is about, and so that my listeners know what you mean.
So I took the initial issue of why is there such a disparity in racial populations between prison and general population. The example of that would be, let's say New Jersey has a African-American population of 20%. Their prison population is 70%. So 20% of the...
Are they real numbers, or are you giving me examples?
I'm giving you examples, but if you give me a second, I'll give you the actual number, because it's as ridiculous as the example I just made. I just didn't
I'm curious for New Jersey specifically, if you have that or can get it quickly.
I will pull it up while I'm talking.
Yeah. So that was an interest of yours, and so that's basically, you are well versed in statistical analysis.
Right, and the interest was based on my experience. Like I saw this in prison. Maryland, I believe it's closer to 25% actual population for African Americans, and 72%, I want to say, was the prison population, and that's absurd. I'm actually just pulling up my thesis stuff. I saw that, and my thesis was about legacy issues that may have contributed to that.
What do you mean by that, legacy issues?
The legacy issues would be something in our past, such as slavery was one of the legacy issues I chose. So is it more likely that a slave state has a greater disparity in their prison population when it comes to race? The other ones I looked at were the number of lynchings and the total area affected by redlining was the other one. And that stuff, the more I read about it, the more it became interesting. And there's definitely a connection. Obviously, slave states have a history of civil rights and everything else when it comes to treating people of color. So you would think it would be worse, but it actually wasn't. The slave states generally, when it came to slavery, were more on par with their prison populations. Maryland was kind of the outlier when it came to that, but there were also, New Jersey. And again, in my research, I discovered this. All the original 13 colonies were slave states. Slave colonies, I guess, is a better way to put it. And so they actually outlawed slavery, at least the northern ones did, post ratification of the Constitution. And so they still had that history, though. When the Civil War was being fought, there were still small populations of slaves living in all parts of the North because they had been born there, before slavery had ended in that state.
Right. You're talking about the racial disparity in the, comparing state population versus prison population. It would also be interesting to include in that analysis the differing percentages of, for example, what percentage of white men get arrested and then end up in prison versus black men that get arrested and end up in prison. Throwing that arrest analysis in there, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
To determine whether or not, if you include, in your analysis, you're including population in the state, but if you were to then include an analysis of those people that actually get arrested, or, is there a higher percentage of minorities that get arrested and end up in prison versus...
Right. And that was one of the things that I kind of got stuck on in my thesis, because I couldn't account, or I hadn't yet accounted for crime rates and arrest rates, and it becomes much more complicated than just, this is who lives here, this is who's in prison.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and again, most of the arrests are happening in urban areas. So what if I look at urban versus rural? Does the same thing hold true? I mean, there's a lot of factors there. And when I got my feedback, that was one of the things they said. You need to kind of look at this and get it to where you can see that you can figure out why, or a control for crime or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Just doing a quick search here as we're talking, it does appear that New Jersey continues to have the highest rate of racial disparities in its prison population in the country, with black residents incarcerated at a rate of 12.5 times that of whites, even as the black incarceration rate is 19% below the national average. Does that stat sound about right to what your analysis uncovered?
It does. Mine was more focused on the percentages, though. So when I'm looking at New Jersey for 2020, it was more of a total. It was more of a total, in the percentages, and I'm looking for the source document where I got it from. It was the Sentencing Project put out the original document that I pulled from.
Mm-hmm.
And here it is. The name of the report was "The Color of Justice: Racial and Ethnic Disparity in Prisons." And that's an easy Google. And then if you pull it up, it immediately kind of starts giving you the statistics on everything.
That's interesting.
And I mean, it's just.
Do you recall what year that report was completed?
This one's 2021.
Oh, 2021.
So
okay.
It's recent. And it just, I mean, it's crazy. In Maryland, state imprisonment for 2019 by percent black. Maryland was the percentage of blacks in prison was 71%, and the percentage of blacks in the population was 29%. For New Jersey, percentage of blacks in prison was 61%, but the percentage of blacks in the population was 13%. So New Jersey actually has a wider disparity.
Can you repeat that stat for New Jersey one more time for me?
New Jersey, the percentage of blacks in prison was 61%, and the percentage of blacks in the population was 13%.
That's unbelievable.
Thank you for listening in. Stay tuned for the next part in this conversation. Don't forget to subscribe and like the show on iTunes, Spotify, and anywhere you listen.